Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am thrilled. I had the privilege and the honor and the joy of spending the day with Doug Bolton today. It was an amazing presentation at noon. And now here we are, and we get to hear this presentation as well. I'm so excited. And very special, we have Vanessa Kroll Bennett, who is the author of This Is Awkward, who is a huge, huge fan of Doug's, as am I, who'll be leading that fireside chat. So be thinking of your questions. Let's get right into it. But first, I want to tell you about upcoming events as we finish out this school year. On Monday, we will be hosting Rachel Mann. She'll be with us on April 20th at noon at 7 p.m. She'll be talking about brace yourself for an AI future. I know everyone has questions about that, so I know you'll want to come and join us for that. The following week, we're welcoming Ashley Graber and Maria Evans on April 22nd at noon and 7 p.m. Their book is called Raising Calm Kids in a World of Worry. Again, another topic that everyone seems to be the forefront of everyone's mind these days. Lisa Phillips comes to us on April 28th at noon and 7 p.m. Teen Relationship Skills in the Social Media Era. Her book is called First Love. Then we're going into a special event that I'm excited to talk about. Catherine Price is the co-author of the book, The Amazing Generation with Jonathan Haidt. She will be with us on May 5th from noon to 1 and again from 7 to 8. We've just added a second hour when Catherine Price will be addressing students from noon to 1 o'clock and then again from 8 to 9. She'll be talking to children 9 to 12 years of age. If you are a teacher or administrator, and consider the possibility of showing this in the classroom during the day, that'd be wonderful. Lots of libraries are having watch parties, as are PTA members. So check it out. There's lots of details on our website. We're going to get right into it. So much to talk about. Everybody's been emailing me all day talking about this important presentation, and my ask of you is to share this event. Text someone, let someone know. This is a very special event to have Vanessa here and Doug here. He was kind enough to share his slides. They'll be on our website, and just share the resource. Let a neighbor, a friend, someone next door or across the country. GPS is free to everyone. So let's get into it. My honor to introduce to you Kevin Rubenstein, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services at D205, and he has the honors of the introduction. So, Dr. Rubenstein, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Gilda, for having this event and also for allowing me to introduce these two great speakers who will come on screen as I introduce them. And I will start with Vanessa Kroll Bennett, who is a national best-selling author, podcaster, and speaker who helps adults raise tweens and teens with joy. She's co-author of the best-selling book, This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained. I mean, for all of those really challenging years. Co-host of This Is So Awkward podcast and co-founder of Less Awkward, a company dedicated to making growing up more comfortable. She's the author of the forthcoming book, Teenhood, Confessions and Lessons for the Trickiest Phase of Parenting. Vanessa was the founder of Dynamo Girl, a company focused on building kids' self-esteem through sports and puberty education. Vanessa is a graduate of Wellesley College and holds a master's in Jewish history, but perhaps her most important schooling comes from her own experiences raising her own four children who are now ages 15 through 23. And we were just talking about that before everybody hopped online here. So welcome to Vanessa for this evening. And I also want to introduce, it's actually a privilege and a pleasure to introduce somebody who I've known as I was logging online here. I was counting 17 years that I've known Doug Bolton since I first interacted with him as a young administrator. Dr. Bolton is a clinical psychologist, and educational leader who's focused his career on supporting students with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. He goes way back to 1987. Dr. Bolton worked in therapeutic day schools as a school psychologist before spending the next 14 years as principal of a school called North Shore Academy, which is a public K-12 public therapeutic day school on the North Shore of Chicago. He currently maintains a private practice and consults in schools with leaders who want to enhance their ability to support their students with mental health issues. Through keynote addresses, professional development workshops, and individual consultations, Dr. Bolton empowers educational teams and really all of you to create school communities and communities in general that foster resilience for our most vulnerable students. And we're thrilled to welcome him back to GPS Parent Series tonight. So take it away to the two of you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kevin.
Gilda.
Absolutely.
So when Gilda asked me about a year ago if I would interview Doug, I jumped at the opportunity and blocked out my calendar many, many, many months in advance because Doug's book, Untethered, which I first read when we had him on the podcast right around Pub
Yeah.
Week, um, is has been one of the most influential books I have ever read in this field. And I have read hundreds and hundreds of books for our podcast and for my writing. So it is such a privilege and a joy, as you will all get to see what a joy Doug is as a human being, to get to be in conversation with him tonight. And just to say up front, the goal is to give you all hope and optimism that what you are facing and what you are grappling with and what you are worrying about is possible. And Doug offers guidance and advice that helps make it feel possible, even when in the moment it seems impossible. So stick around because you never know what wisdom Doug is gonna share, and we will save about 10 minutes at the end for questions, but feel free to put them in the Q&A as we go, and I will keep track of them. So you heard Doug's bio, which is very impressive. Um, but ultimately, Doug, you have been on a lifelong journey in thinking about these topics, engaging with them personally, professionally. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself in the ways in which your bio might not have shown?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's so nice to be in conversation with you, Vanessa. And um, what an introduction. I feel like I can only disappoint everyone now. So I'm a little bit, I think you raised the bar a little too high. But I'm really grateful and the work that you do. And if you haven't heard the This Is So Awkward podcast, listen. If you haven't read the book, read it. It's amazing. So, anyways, it's an interesting thing. My I talk a lot about my biography actually in the book, and especially clinicians who read the book would come up to me and say, "Boy, you talked a lot about yourself in that book," because I talk a lot about my struggles, and I think it was interesting because it was more comfortable for me at some level to share, to be vulnerable on the page. And I'm not sure if this is your experience, but being vulnerable on the page than it is necessarily in person. So I
I
think
think
that,
it's why the book is so effective because you do make yourself vulnerable and it feels like you have lived the advice you're giving
yeah.
to others. And I think that's part of what makes it so powerful is that you do not come across as perfect, all-knowing, infallible, and it allows the guidance you give, which is manifold, to be more relatable, in fact.
Well, yeah, well, I feel like we can all learn from my mistakes, right? That was
Totally.
one of my hopes. But you know, the it's a what a beautiful question because where that brought me was thinking about my mom and my dad who divorced. So the divorce was a very, very important part of my personal and professional development. You know, my dad was a minister, my mom, social worker. and we really had kind of the ideal home, four kids. We had someone from we lived outside of Syracuse, in right next to Syracuse University, and we had a college student there to help out, living in the attic. So we had plenty of adults around, and really kind of on the turn of a dime, when my dad decided this isn't the life he wanted. It created a change in my life where at some level I went from having so many adults in my life to my dad who I'd see on Sundays, which was kind of more typical back in the early 70s, and my mom who went from being a preacher's wife to working, going to school full time. And so, the principal before me, his name is Bob Gottlieb, would say, because we're in a therapeutic school, and he says, yeah, we're all here for a reason.
Mm,
And I think that what he said was that what that meant is we're all there because we understand and can have the real lived experience of loss for me, of trauma for other people, and so that's definitely a part of my journey. My dad was a writer, so he wrote a book called People Skills years
mm.
ago, and it's still in print. My brother updated it a little bit because it was a little dated in some of its. And my mom was a social worker, and she was a doer. She would say, um, "Always do the needful thing," and uh, and my dad was more of a thinker and a
Mm.
writer, and so I feel like I much of my career was really about my mom in some ways, and then being able to write and put into words became a little bit more about my dad.
So, Doug, I want to get to you. You speak to that specific, what you could call a traumatic event in your own childhood,
Yeah,
and divorce is listed as one of the adverse childhood experiences that, is considered to deeply impact kid. And as those ACEs add up, um, more and more concerns about the future of that child.
yeah,
You worked with those children. You worked with the children who much of the rest of the world had given up on.
yeah,
You were kind of the last stop
yeah,
on the train. And as your former boss commented, that your empathy, your colleagues' empathy allowed you to reach those kids in a new way. And I want to explore what you learned, the lessons, the skills, in addition to your training that allowed you to reach those kids, but also for everyone listening, allow them to apply those lessons to their own
yeah.
communities, their own families. And can we just start with the concept of secure attachment, which has
Mhm.
gotten sort of diluted and overused, and the
Yeah.
meaning has sort of lost its true meaning. If you could just quickly define it and talk about why it's so important on a child's path towards
Yeah.
adulthood.
So as I think about secure attachment, it's this ability to trust that others will be there for us at its most basic level. And there's all sorts of reasons why I think about 70% of people are considered securely attached and 30% of people struggle with this. But I think there's a lot of different reasons. And it's fascinating when you look at the early childhood work to see just how important these very what seem like um, you know what seem like very small minor things can be really important in a very nuanced way in terms of how do we relate to one another, and there's it's our ability to feel seen begins with people's attunement to us as infants, right? When we're an
Hmm.
infant um, and we make a face and our parent makes a face, or makes the same face back, it's like we're learning this reciprocity. And there are things that get in the way of that. There are life things where people have to work two jobs and they don't have that time to be able to do that. There can be depression, there can be substance use, there can be all sorts of things that get in the way of our ability to provide that for our kids. But the one of the things that and it's in this predictability that allows us to trust
Mm,
in not just in relationships, but in the world more generally. Um, and so when we get off to a rough start when it comes to feeling attuned, it can really impact how we show up in the world because so much of the world is based on this social trust, this social compact we have with one another. Um, and um, I like I'm not sure who said it. I think Jonah Lehrer may have said it, but this idea that our attachment story is not, it's not a life sentence, right? That
right.
the beautiful thing is it can always be adapted. And in my case, I think I was really securely attached. But then after the divorce, I became very anxious about whether people were going to show up. My mom was wonderful in so many ways and always late. And when you've got a mom who you're not sure is going to be like when you're already kind of anxious, like my whole family, all the adults just kind of left my life, and now I'm
I
not
was
sure what.
always the last kid in the parking lot from the
Yeah,
school line pickup. Yeah.
right. And so I think I became much less securely attached. And the thing that I loved about being at North Shore Academy um, was we'd have kids for several years. Some kids were there for, started in early elementary school and graduated
Hmm.
with us. And
Hmm.
it allows us to develop those secure attachments in school. And 30 hours a week for 40 weeks is a lot of time that you can use to build those attachments. And so that was one of the things that was so helpful for me was to see how communities helped me reattach later on in my adolescence as I reconnected and in my adulthood, but also being able to be in places where we could make that happen.
Yeah, can you talk about, because I think people assume, because the research is, initially about a parent-child attachment, but it doesn't have to be a parent. It doesn't have to be a relative. I mean, you received students who, for any number of reasons, did not have secure attachment. I mean, if you were going to guess on the estimate, the percentage of the students versus the general population, I would imagine it would be extraordinarily
It's
high.
extraordinarily high, absolutely, yeah.
And it's this sort of it's never too late message, right? You all provided that secure attachment that they didn't have. How does that look, Doug, differently when you're dealing with a 12 or 16-year-old, let's say, than when you're or an elementary, then you're when you're dealing with an infant? What does that look and feel like as you try to build that trust?
Well, and help me if I get this right, because you are the one I would go to talk about tweet. So
I'd only
just
give your advice back to you, Doug, so I don't know why you'd ask me.
so I guess what the tricky part about adolescence, I think, is that it's developmentally it's appropriate for them to start separating.
Hmm.
And it's hard to separate and it's hard to help someone manage attachment without if they haven't yet connected and they need to separate. And so I think for me, you know, as we're going through that process, can I be a stable person for them to separate from? I keep coming
Mm,
back as we're talking, thinking about this. Um, I think it was Piaget who talked about the rapprochement phase of childhood, where the toddler is brave enough to kind of run around and go outside of their parents' sight, but then they come back and it's their
hmm.
home base, right? And I think that it's important for us to be a good, solid home base, even when kids are pushing us away. And that's typically the time especially if we've got our own attachment issues. And this is one of the things that I had to deal with in my own parenting. was how my own attachment issues would show up with my kids needing to, in healthy ways, separate
Hmm.
from me, or working with students who were separating and trying to establish their own sense of themselves. And sometimes it comes at the cost of us. And so then can we be solidly, can we still provide a foundation of emotional security in that moment? And can I stay regulated? Can I stay present? Can I stay connected in the way that's not overwhelming for them, but meets their need, their changing need for intimacy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important point that so much of the work with kids is about looking inside ourselves and
Yeah,
seeing what sets us off. And you talk about that very vulnerably in the book. And I then had to interview you so you could give me advice about how to handle that in my own house. But I think, there's the looking inside piece, but I want to, which is so critical, and I don't want to brush that aside, but I want to think about how the way kids show up in ways that are really hard for us as
yeah,
adults can feel really personal
yeah,
and can inspire us to globalize about kids being, quote, bad kids or
yeah,
difficult kids or kids we should just sort of write off. And you explore so beautifully how, you know, I mean, you refer to the research about that kids do well when they can, but
yeah,
you go even deeper with that, Doug. And I'd love to really explore how when a kid is behaving in a way that's just awful and
yeah,
you don't want to be there and you don't want to deal with them and it's bringing up stuff for you, how do we think about that? How do we not only regulate ourselves, but what then can we do in the face of that, knowing underneath there is a good child
yeah,
somewhere
yeah.
under there?
Well, that's what I love about it. Father Greg Boyle said, "How else except through connection can we be aware of our own goodness?"
Hmm.
Right? And so that connection is so important. But there are two things as you're talking that really show up for me. And the first is emotional regulation. Is it really was a shift in me. We were a very behaviorally based program. This behavior leads to this consequence, which, we've got point sheets and we've got data and we've got all of these things. And we thought this is our magic potion that helps kids heal and grow and change. And every therapeutic school had these things. There was nothing special about that. And I realized that we were successful not because of those things, but in spite of those things.
Hmm.
And in fact, we were able, we would give a lot of consequences, punishments to kids, but we would do them in a way that was empathetic um, and really it was less about this perfect menu of incentives and consequences, and it was more about how we showed up for them. And when I began to read the research, what I realized is that, and this is what Stuart Shanker would talk about, which is misbehavior is stress behavior.
Hmm.
And and it's true for me that I have my worst moments due to stress. Why is it that I think my kids and I have these bad moments um, and I'm not motivated to have them. I yell at my kids. I wasn't motivated to yell at my kids. So why is it that we still hang on to this motivation framework for how we
Hmm.
understand behavior? Because it's so limiting. If it's motivation, then we just have incentives and punishments. But if it's dysregulation, all of a sudden we begin to understand things differently. And what I began to understand is that it's much more about our nervous system than it is about motivation. And so in these moments when my nervous system is overactivated, then I am going to show up in ways that aren't helpful. It's going to trigger that all sorts of changes in me that are focused on the here and now, that's focused on trying to regain control when I feel out of control. trying to figure out, I become less flexible. I lose empathy. All of these things happen because our brains are really geared towards a different kind of crisis. It's not a social
Hmm.
crisis brains are geared towards. It's, running from a grizzly bear, and that being flexible is not helpful. Being empathetic is not helpful. Oh, I hope I don't scratch the bear if, right? Like that's not helpful. And so, and so when I began to understand that there's whole different tools that you've got in these moments. And the biggest tool is how can I help my child regulate? And then we can talk about the behavior, right? But
Hmm.
but the first thing is let's get them regulated. And then what I realize is in order to do that, I need to be regulated. And dysregulation is wildly contagious. If you've got a kid that's dysregulated, you're quickly going to feel dysregulated. And so then together, how do we learn how to regulate each other rather than, you know, show up in a dysregulated place, and then we become more controlling, and then and oftentimes we become punishing. And how do we punish? We exclude. We send kids to their rooms. We exclude. We suspend kids. And what does that do to people who struggle with attachment? If every time we struggle, our first step is we're going to exclude, um, it just re-triggers all of their attachment stuff that shows up.
So you offer an alternate framework, and I'm very well versed in it in this moment because I was literally editing the chapter in my book where I quote you and I talk about this particular strategy. Um, where you talk about a colleague saying to you all, instead of thinking about what are we going to take away,
Yeah,
let's think about what can we put on the table? What can
yeah,
we give a kid to get them to where we want them to be as opposed to take away? And it relates to something you talk about elsewhere in the book, which is that bad behavior, problem behavior is a symptom of
yeah,
something else. And
yeah,
so those two things tie together, thinking about what's underneath the behavior, thinking about what we can offer a kid
yeah.
rather than what do we take away from a kid. Can you go down that path a little bit, Doug?
I
Because
sure
it is
can. Yeah.
really the most beautiful, generous, empathic concept.
It's so Mike Lyons, our assistant dean, I can still remember, a lot of the stuff doesn't come from me, and a lot of our
And you attribute it, which not everybody does. So also credit to you on that.
well, and so I would be, but I'd watch people doing this remarkable work, and Mike came into my office and he said, and he was talking about a conversation with a teacher, and he just said, I want to, he says, when I see a kid struggling, I think about two things. I think, what would I want if I was in their place? What would help
Mm,
me in this moment? And what I realized is, being told to go to my room and fill out a processing sheet in the middle of an argument with my wife probably would not go well, right? Um, and then he says, I always try and think what I can put on the table instead of what I can take away. And the beautiful thing about this is, first of all, there it is. I think about this when my son Matthew, especially, because he's the one who I would get into most of these
hmm
dysregulated battles with. But when he was at his kind of where he was really trying to assert his status, as David Yeager would talk about, this sense of his own sense of agency, in ways that I found maddening. All that I would do is it was like a Rolodex of anything that he cared about. What am I going to take away? What am I going to take away? What am I going to take away so I can get control? Because when we are dysregulated, when we're hungry, we seek food. When we feel powerless, we seek power and control.
hmm
And so it's the first place we go. And so then what we do is we begin to take things away from people. Um, when in fact what flips this on its head, and then of course, these are the things that dysregulate us. So I call it the holy trinity of dysregulation, which is, feeling disempowered, feeling
hmm
powerless, feeling devalued and disconnected. And so often when our kids are dysregulated, those are the things we do. Leave the dinner table and go to your room. What does that say? You don't have any, the child doesn't have any choice over that. You're not valuable here. at this table and you're disconnected from everybody.
Hmm.
So no wonder things get harder instead of better. So the thing that's beautiful about Mike's, I think about what I can put on the table is the things that we put on the table are actually regulation strategies,
Mm,
right? So what do we put on the table? Why don't you take a walk? Do you want to listen to some music before we talk about this? Do you want to walk the dog? Right? Do you want to play with Legos? You know, and do work on your Lego project. I will go do a crossword puzzle because that regulates me. And let's come back together in 15 minutes with our best brains available to us. But because right now we can't solve a problem because neither of us have the brain power to be able to do that.
mine is I try it never works is do you want to braid my hair? Because I love having my hair braided and
Yes.
it's sort of like a tactile. They
Yeah.
never take me up on it, but I do keep trying. Right. So it's not just in the book I call it the Oreo strategy because it was a way for me to connect with a
Yeah.
kid who felt disconnected. But Doug, I want to you're coming back to regulation and that's in the moment. And it's so critical and it's where we all fall down all the
Yeah.
time, right? As parents. And then it cycles. In our regulated moments and our moments away from the sort of the fire, we worry a lot about our kids. We worry about who they are, who they're going
Yeah.
to become. We worry that the things we're seeing will never get better. And you got advice from a colleague or
Yeah.
supervisor, and she said to you, development is on your side. And it was in the context actually with a personal challenge in your own
Yeah.
family. And it's something I keep in mind constantly when I'm looking at kids I work with, kids I in my own house. And what does that mean? It is such a touchstone, and I want you to kind of dig underneath that and help people
Yeah.
understand what that means.
Well, and this is what I love. I love so Gilda titled this, and I love the title of this because it's so helpful to think about the hope, right? That
Yeah.
and we go from the this end of our rope to hope. And I think that the way I've been thinking about it lately is that when our kids are going through these hard times, this is their hero's journey, right? This is and so they're in it, right? And then the interesting thing is that hero's journey that there's a mentor involved, right? And the
Hmm.
mentor gets involved, and then they find their way to transformation. But so often when we're in it, it feels like this is the end place, right? And that we look at the behavior and then as parents, I don't think we can avoid then scanning into the future and saying, oh my gosh, if they're behaving like this now in high school, then how
Hmm.
are they ever going to hold a job? How are they ever going to make it through college? How are they? And all of these anxieties that show up. I can remember my son Matthew was he did a couple of things like this. I walked into the living room and we had just gotten, it was when flat screen, like the flat screen TVs were brand new, and I walked in and we just paid way too much money for one, and my son and I saw these scratches on it, and I said to him, I said, how did those scratches get there? And he's like, I don't know, Daddy, but maybe someone took this rock over here and went like this on it. And I, and so not only was I upset about the thousands of dollars I'd spent on the television, but then I was like, oh, he's not going to be able to take responsibility. He's lying, and he's a 4-year-old liar. He's going to be a 24-year-old serial liar, right? And so then I felt like I needed to take care of that right away, and I of course overreacted. But this is the I think it's when he was struggling with his schoolwork as a in high school, I thought, how's he ever going to manage
Hmm.
college?
Hmm.
And what happens, there's Dan Gilbert has this he talks about this study in his book Stumbling Upon Happiness, and what he did was he asked people, where do you think your life is going to be in 10 years? And they'd say, essentially, it's I'm going to be 10 years older, but things are pretty much the same. Um, and then he said, well, um, what were things like 10 years ago and how have they changed? And it's like, oh my gosh, they've changed so much, right? In ways that I never would have imagined. And I think that that's what one of the things that we can get caught up in with our kids is not trusting development. And the thing that when we think about um, the skills that kids need and the skills when kids are struggling, they're almost always have to do with the prefrontal cortex.
Mm,
It's almost always executive functioning. It's almost always that's where emotional regulation comes in. That's where we can persist when things get hard. That's when we can initiate tasks. That's when it's a part of our brain that helps us to plan. And that's not fully developed until kids are 28, 29.
hmm
And so when you've got a 15-year-old sitting in front of you struggling with these skills, right? It's that part of their brain is only halfway developed. No wonder they're struggling with it. Or sometimes they can do it really well and other times they can't. Well, that's the natural piece of development. My I had when Matthew was struggling, and I kept thinking, I think this is this story. Like I would just think, how many, he, he didn't want. He kept telling me he was ready to go to soccer practice, and he wasn't ready to go. And I just became, and I thought he was, and of course I was going to be late for, all of a sudden I was totally dysregulated because I'd be late for the AYSO volunteer soccer coach, right? Like. So then I'm I'm taking away television and I'm doing all these things that and of course we get there and we're the first people there and it didn't
Ah,
matter. It just didn't matter, right? And so I talked to my mentor and I just said, you know, um how many months should he be suspended from television or whatever? Like I was trying to think, and he said, just let Matthew know this will get easier for him. And that's what development does, is it helps the hard things get easier for us and we can make better decisions and these things come to us, but the more we panic as adults that it's not going to happen. And this is what I just love about being at North Shore Academy for so long is that you could see the kids at 12 and 13, but then they'd come back at
hmm
23 and 24 and you'd look at the lives that they created for themselves um, and in some ways, it's not that we've got to change them during that time. We just have to contain. We just have to help make sure that the worst things don't happen, and then they're going to develop into in ways that we never would have imagined. And so many kids. That's where I love the title of this is so many kids. When we look at them as
hmm
15-year-olds or 14-year-olds, we think, what is going to happen in their lives? I was telling the story about a boy today who was totally out of control and had to be physically restrained and then arrested because he was so out of control as a 15-year-old. And by the time he was 17, he was a graduation speaker. And now I'm friends. He's a friend on Facebook, and he's always posting. He's got millions of viewers. He's posting about his floor refinishing business.
Mm,
And I tell about him. He's Dylan in the book. He's the one who, who has, who I really learned from. And so to me, it's even now is when my kids struggle, I think, oh, but this isn't the end of the story.
right.
This isn't like there's a whole, there are so many more chapters to write. This is just the challenge part of the story.
So we can be empathetic, we can be generous, we can be regulated, and kids still need limits
Yes,
and consequences, right? This is not just a let it all go and see what happens, right? They
absolutely.
need that to feel
Yeah.
safe. Talk about the difference between sort of punishment. You touched on punishment, but I want to think about and hear about consequences, sometimes the natural consequences. Like, how do we let that play out? How do we have faith that things will play out as they should, for lack of a better framing?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times So when I think about punishment, oftentimes um, punishment, we use punishment because at the end of the day, our belief is, whether it's we're thinking it or just feeling it, the belief is that they're doing this, and if I can just make something so uncomfortable, if I can put fear in them about ever doing this again, that they're not going to do this again. Um, and and that seldom works because what what punishments do when is we create these systems of fear, and fear begins to shut our brains down so we're not as available for things. So here's what I would say is I think boundaries are really important. I think that and value-based boundaries are important.
Hmm.
Saying no, that's not okay is important. Being able to the interesting thing about natural consequences is, in schools a lot of times they'll say, well, detention's a natural consequence of being late. And the thing about natural consequences is natural consequences are only natural if you don't implement them, right? Like once you implement a consequence, it's no longer natural.
Mm.
So if I go outside in the rain and without an umbrella, I get wet. That's a natural consequence. Um, if I give someone a detention, if I'm late for a meeting, no one makes me sit in my boss's office for 45 minutes after everybody's left, right? Like that doesn't happen. And so I think we've got to be careful about using fear as our as our motivating factor for behavior change. And this is where Ross Greene's kids do well if they can comes in, is if we really believe they're doing their best. What I do is I think, okay, there's something that's dysregulating for them. There's something that's really hard for them. And I think one of the things that we begin to see, like in our schools, is kids struggling um, to manage the organizational demands, the executive functioning demands of a rigorous curriculum. And so they get lost, and then it's hard for them to get their homework done. And then they feel discouraged, and then they begin to shut down. That may be misbehavior because they're not getting their work done. They're not doing their homework when they're supposed to do it, but it's stress based.
Hmm.
And this is where I think, you know, number one, can we set the value that the thing that I would do with a teenager in that situation was to say, well, what are your goals? What do you hope to get? Instead of saying, I expect you to get A's, B's, and C's, what do you expect? And oftentimes their goals and their hopes for themselves are even higher than ours.
Yeah.
And then being able to partner with them. How can let's figure out how we can help you get there. That must be really discouraging that it's hard to sit down and get the homework done. As opposed to saying, if you don't do your homework, then you don't get to go on the ski trip this weekend with your buddies, right?
Doug, are there times when the stakes are too high to let natural consequences run their course?
Yeah, I think that there are, I think that there are times when we need to be more clear about our the limits and boundaries that we set. The thought that comes to my mind is things like substance use,
Hmm.
right? Even if I guess the I'm still not sure how punishment would fit into substance use, but I sure know how that you may, instead of grounding your child, right, instead of saying you're grounded, this is the shift, I think, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get the nuance well. Um, but instead of saying you were drinking last night, and so I'm going to ground you for 3 weeks. Who knows if after 4 weeks they're going to be ready, right? I guess
Hmm.
what I would say is, um, you know, drinking is really unhealthy for you, and it's really dangerous, and we can't take the risk that something's gonna happen. And so until we can till we can work out a way that we can make sure that you can be safe when you're with your friends in ways that we believe help you feel safe, even if you don't, then we're not then we can't have you leaving the house. I think that's a different kind of conversation. But it's about setting those limits. But the values are around safety, and it's not this indiscriminate amount of time. It's like, let's figure this out together. Let's
Hmm.
let's figure out how we can keep this from happening.
Yeah, and the hard thing about it is it's not like kids are going to get down on their knees and thank you in their deep gratitude for making these choices.
They
I,
didn't with you? I didn't. They always do with
you
me.
will
Yeah.
appreciate this story, Doug. I had dinner with my 23-year-old last week, and we were actually getting on the subway when he brought this up, and he said, sorry, for people who don't know, I live in New York, so I call it the subway. And he said, you know, Mom, apropos of nothing, literally apropos of nothing. He said, you know, Mom, there was so much you and Dad did that annoyed me when I was younger, and it really made me angry. And now I'm so glad you did it. I'm so
Mhm.
grateful you made the choices
Yeah.
that you made. And you know me, I would have spent an hour like asking him, what do you mean? What, give me an example. And of course, like my husband was like, what did he mean? And I told his 15-year-old brother, and he was like, what was he talking about? And I was like, I don't know. I just took the compliment.
Yeah, take it. Take it.
But it's hard
Yeah.
to do that. It's we can say it and we can advise it, but to go that route, to be that patient, to watch the development, to sort of like take a different tack, to not react, to not sort of give in to our anxiety is really, really, really hard work. So as
It,
people are listening, I don't want them to feel like we're like, oh,
uh,
just do this. It's great. It's exhausting and it matters and it
and
makes a
it
difference.
makes it, and it's frightening. The this Matthew said something similar to me. He said, even though I wasn't able to do what you were asking me to do a lot of times, he's like the values. I feel like the values are showing up in my life now. Like I get
Mm,
those now. And then the other thing I would say is a lot of the things that we think of as being um, critical, right? Or I can't remember the word that you used, but this idea that really serious. In the moment, they can feel more serious, and I guess that's one of the things that in our dysregulation, one of the things our dysregulated mind does is it does two things. One is it gives us a false sense of urgency.
mm,
It's like if we don't figure this out now, then he's never gonna be able to blah blah blah, right? And also this exaggeration, the sense that this is gonna affect his whole life, right? That
hmm
oh my gosh, and as an administrator, it's like oh if we don't suspend this kid right now, then this lunchroom's gonna be up for grabs for for the rest of the year, right?
hmm
That we all go there, and it's natural for us to go there. We can't keep ourselves from going there. The question is, let's not act on that.
hmm
Let's wait till we're regulated again, and then we can see things a little bit more clearly and give it time, give it space to breathe. Help other people who are more regulated, help us think through these things. But it's really hard to do.
Kevin, did you want to chime in?
I'm just really enjoying the discussion. When you were talking about that great compliment from your own child, young adults there, I was thinking about just feedback that I've given to my parents and that sort of thing, but only after sitting in literally thousands of meetings with parents with different backgrounds.
Hmm
So just as a, for instance, like I didn't know that not everybody had a parent who, first of all, was home after school every day, but second of all, had a structure for setting up homework at the homework
hmm
table, right? And just the importance of that in my own development and how many families may not know that as a structure. And so,
Yeah.
Yeah.
can you just talk about, you talked a little bit about the different sorts of families that you both come from and just how families are becoming attuned to sort of like what's out there in terms of the different parenting styles and what's really important and to focus on.
Oh, that's a great question. I kind of want to punt this to Vanessa, um, the thing that strikes me from when we were kids is that parents are spending significantly more time with their kids. I think moms are, I think together parents are spending twice as much
Hmm.
time with their kids um, as as our parents did, and fathers four times more.
Hmm.
And the number of two income families has increased, has doubled in that time. So parents are working more and they're spending more time with their kids. And there's this mental health crisis. It doesn't
Hmm.
speak well for the amount of
Hmm.
time. More time with us doesn't seem to be helping necessarily. The thing that I guess I think about is how can we use that time well? And I think there are ways that we are over supervising our kids and over involved in ways that keep them from being able to be the independent people that we need them to that they need to become, right? To have that freedom to be able to make mistakes and to solve problems on their own without mom or dad right there to um and so that's one piece. And then I think that every family finds its way through finds their path through this. And the thing that strikes me is when kids struggle, we often look at the parents. And you know I've got two kids who had very different brain development, right? And for one, not one is not better than the other, but for one of them, her prefrontal cortex was fully developed when she was in the womb, I think. Like she came out ready to go, right? And so schoolwork was easy for her. It was easy for her to be compliant. It was easy for her to set things aside and put her phone down and do her homework. And that was much harder for my son. And it wasn't out of caring, it wasn't out of anything. It was just that they both needed different I needed to be a different parent with each of them. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And so I think that for me, if you're a parent who's working single mom who was working two jobs like mine, there wasn't a whole lot of
Hmm.
time that she could spend with us, and there were costs to that, and I think there were some benefits to that actually in terms of our ability to become more independent. I think that the thing is that when things get really hard, how can we show up for one another, regardless of what our family situation might be? How can as adults we not be over involved? And how can we make sure that even if we don't have much time, what my mom would do, because I would sometimes she would leave for work before I woke up, and sometimes she'd be home after I've gone to bed because she was teaching night school at that time, and she would leave a like she'd leave an egg in the pan, like she'd already started cooking. So all I had to do was turn the thing on. She'd have the toast in the toaster. She'd have the
Mm.
casserole. I don't know when she had time to do this now as an adult, but she'd have the casserole ready to go. So I knew that she was there, right? Like I knew
Hmm.
that she was present, and that was her way of letting me know I'm here and I'm present. Um, uh, for other kids, that they might have needed more than that, but that was one of the ways that she and I navigated that time.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, there's so much judgment about how people parent. There's so much fear that we've somehow ruined our kids, that we've done it all wrong. There's so much information coming at us that sometimes rather than it, first of all, it's not all accurate, but second of all, rather than to serve as a helpful support and guide, it just overwhelms, and makes us feel like we failed. And I, I like to think about what are, one or two things that parents would like to do differently, when every family is different, every kid is different, and parents are the experts in their own children. It doesn't mean they always get it right, but they know their kids better than anyone else. And rather than think about like, we're going to change everything, the whole system's going to change, right? Homework's all going to change. I like to think more about what are one or two really small things we can do differently and seeing if that shifts the needle. And so, if you've got a kid who's struggling with homework, I mean, I used to open my kid's backpack and it was like someone had vomited inside of it, like, but instead of actual vomit. It was papers and gum and snacks. And I mean,
Well,
you've been an
and lunch that was
educator.
3 weeks old. That was the
Yeah,
hard
I
part.
mean, it's,
Yeah.
the sandwich I had made him lovingly was at the bottom. And to Doug's point, the overwhelm, the dysregulation would kick in. And then, just the reminder, it's okay. Like this is actually not a big deal. And then backtracking and saying, hey, kiddo, like what's one thing we can do differently? I think it's like rather than global shifts and global change and just small things. And so as you work with, so many families and yourself, Kevin, just like helping them think about what's one change. I mean, I think for all of us, it's about looking at our phones less
Yeah.
when our kids are around. It's getting phones away from tables, dinner tables. But it's also like, what is the joy we can bring? What is the fun we can bring? What is the play we can bring to our relationship? Because a kid who's had that is more able to then sit down and do homework or organize their backpack, for example.
And I love that. And one of the things that makes me think of, I remember, and Kevin, I was out near Elmhurst so I've got this vivid memory of when Matthew and I were really struggling, and it's hard. It was hard to find. It was hard for him to find good things in Dad, and it was hard for me to find good times with him because they were so. It was always about, the ways that he was struggling and the anxiety it created for me,
Hmm.
and so. I love woodworking, so I said, let's work on a project together. And we drove. We took we went to lumber yard an hour away to try and get the lumber, and we planned it together. And it's still like we never ended up building anything, and it was still hard, but it was enough, right?
Hmm.
Like that. He was intentional about joining me, and I was intentional about inviting him, and we, it's a marathon that we often are stopping and limping and
Hmm.
struggling through, and I remember that really vividly of that time when it was so hard to connect because that's the thing that's really tricky is you love your child, but sometimes it's hard to like them, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. They love you, and it's hard for them to. They love you, but it's hard for them to like you. And these moments are. It's just how can we stick with it, and how can I show up as my best self even in these moments when I'm feeling rejected, or these moments when I feel hopeless, or these moments when I feel so ineffective. It's like how can I just stay present in these moments?
So we've got 3 minutes left. If anyone has been holding on to a question that they were waiting for a break in conversation, you're going to keep waiting because Doug and I will keep
We
talking
can
to each
keep going.
other.
Well, you know what? And everybody's noting how much fun it is to listen to you, relatable, how spectacular this pairing is. So no problems there. I have a comment for you. Several light bulb moments for me. I loved what you said when you talked about how as they're pulling away from us. Doug, you heard me today talking about the origin story of GPS. I have a
Yeah.
13-year-old who were going shopping, and the woman says to my daughter, "Oh, you look so much like your mother." And I see the look of horror on her face, and I go down this rabbit hole of I'm a terrible parent. I have a child that's going to be a brat for the rest of her life, and all of that until I heard about the book Get Out of My Life. But first, we drive me and Cheryl to the mall, which started all of GPS 30 years ago. But I love what you said when you mentioned how we want them to break away from us.
Hmm.
So let's look at that secure attachment. That's the foundation. And how does that affect when they ultimately and in the most healthy way separate from us? It was really a light bulb moment for us. I just want to comment about, so much of what you've said is so brilliant. And of course, we're hearing they get their calm from us. It's not about preparing the child it's about preparing the child for the road, not the road for the child, letting them
Hmm.
have those failures. There's a word that keeps coming up again and again, and that word is being curious.
Yeah.
Um, and I think so many parents struggle with how do I do that communication piece? And I keep hearing this coming up again and again. And I think it's a great little reminder, be, what is it, curious instead of judgment? Talk about that for a minute. What are your thoughts about that word?
Oh, I love it. In fact, I think there's a whole section of the book in there. I wrote it a while ago, but I do know that. So I'm like, which section is it in? I can't remember. But no, I think that this is the thing is that when kids misbehave, and we go straight to, oh, it's just motivation,
Hmm.
then we go to incentives and punishments. But when we see it through the lens of regulation, the thing that I do now is I think, what's stressing them out? I wonder
Hmm.
what's
Right,
stressful about this for
right,
them right now.
right.
And because they don't usually show up this way, right? They're not doing their homework. I wonder what's stressful about the
Hmm.
homework. They want to get it. They don't want to be the kid in class who doesn't show up with their homework. So I wonder what's hard for them about this. And so to me, that's like the go-to strategy. And Ross Green and his work, and I know you've had Ross Green here, but he does a nice job of structuring. How do you ask? How can you be curious in these
Hmm.
moments? What he
Mhm.
talks about is he talks about the invitation. How can you invite the conversation? And I love, Vanessa, you were also saying, but there's also the other part. So part of it is hearing their story, but
Mhm.
then his next step is, well, then this has an impact on us too, and I want to be able to talk about that, and then let's come up with a solution together. But I do
Yes.
think the first step is being curious.
Yeah. Well, as we're closing out, I'd love to hear from the two. Vanessa, Doug, what's one thought that you really want to leave you with us with tonight?
Just to piggyback on what Doug just said, if the first invitation in being curious and finding out what's going on doesn't work, don't give up. It's hard. You have to try different strategies. Different kids need different kinds of invitations. Some want a hand engraved, you know, with a beautiful stamp, and some are happy with a paperless post. And so,
Yeah.
really keep at it, because even if you think they don't care and they're not listening and it doesn't matter to them, it does matter. It matters when you show up. It matters when you ask, even if they don't acknowledge it.
And sometimes they don't even know themselves why it's hard for them to do these things. So that's
Totally.
another piece. The first thing that came to my mind was get Vanessa's book when it comes out. So that
Ah!
was the first thing that came to mind. And if you haven't read her other books, read them. So that's the first thing. Hop onto her podcast. It is amazing. And she and Cara are just so dynamic together, and they have the best guests. But I guess the other thing I'm going to come back to the part about hope is that I think that there's really important things that happen, strengths that show up. It was because of my darkest moments that I think I've been able to be the psychologist I am, the principal I am. I think it was because of those things, not in spite of those things.
Hmm.
And I think so I guess what I would say is when you're in the darkest moments, just know that there's things happening, that there's that there's yeah, that we're building something, even though it can feel hopeless in the moment.
So beautiful.
So beautiful. I second that. Well, if you just can't get enough of Doug and Vanessa, you can go to the GPS YouTube channel. You'll be able to see the noon presentation. You'll be able to see the 7 p.m. presentation with a conversation. I'm sure that, Vanessa, we have your conversation when you were with us. And then you can come back in March next year and hear her again on the new book, Teenhood. So this is where we go hug the kids. So we're going to go hug the kids now.
Great.
So thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
Gilda.
Thank,
Amazing, Doug. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kevin.
Amazing.
Good to see
so
all of you.
grateful, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Kevin, so good to see you.
Great.
Thanks.
Likewise.
Thanks, everyone.